The Roman conquest of Britain began in 43 AD, and after about 40 years, the island looked something like this. Britain was quite rich in resources that the Romans needed: precious metals, farmable land, and of course, lots of potential slaves, or people as we would call them. Essentially, for the cost of having to live in Britain, the Romans got everything they needed to fuel their empire. All in all, Britain was a valuable asset to the Romans. Now, the reason why you clicked onto this video: Ireland also has all those important metals. Pretty much the whole country is arable. And there were in fact people that lived there that could have done with a bit of civilizing. So why did the Romans conquer Ireland?
Before I talk about why the Romans didn't conquer Ireland, I'd first like to talk about why they would have. As I briefly mentioned above, Ireland is quite a resource-rich island. Along with all the valuable metals and arable land, there are strategic reasons as to why it would have been beneficial for the Romans to conquer Ireland. Romans struggled with fully crushing British rebel groups as they were a quick sailing trip away from complete safety, where they could return from whenever they wanted to. Control of the Irish Sea would have been advantageous to the Romans. As Tacitus, a Roman historian, said, Ireland is positioned between Britain and Spain, and is easily accessible from the seas around Gaul. It would unite the strongest parts of our empire with great mutual advantage. So to summarise, plenty of resources, arable land, people, and would have been in the Romans' interest to control, from a strategic perspective. Once again we return to Tacitus. He wrote, Agricola crossed over in the leading ship to conquer people who were up to that time unknown to us, and he subdued them in a series of successful actions. Tacitus also wrote that Agricola kept an exiled Irish chieftain with him, who he hoped to use for a future invasion, and in Irish folklore an exiled chieftain returned to Ireland with an army and conquered much of the country around the same time a Roman invasion would have occurred. The perhaps most important piece of evidence is the Roman fort that was discovered on the Dromana headland, which could have been where the initial invasion forces operated out of. Let's quickly review the evidence that supports the idea that the Romans conquered Ireland. Agricola crossed a body of water to conquer people who were unknown to the Romans. According to the Irish and the Romans, there was an exiled Irish lord who returned to Ireland with an army, and in Irish folklore conquered much of the island. And there was a Roman fort found in Dromana, which is where the Romans could have landed on their initial expedition. On the surface, it seems like the Romans definitely came, saw and conquered Ireland, but this isn't exactly true on further inspection. First, Agricola did cross a body of water to conquer unknown people, but that could have been several places, and doesn't necessarily mean Ireland. Historians reckon that Tacitus was talking about the island of Arran. The Irish chieftain Tull Chocmar was probably a real person who did return to Ireland with an army, but that doesn't mean any Romans accompanied him. One theory suggests that Agricola did give Chocmar some men so that he could support a friendly leader in charge of Ireland, but there's little evidence to support this theory, and even if it was true, it still, at least in my opinion, doesn't mean Romans conquered Ireland. Chocmar probably raised his army from Scottish and Irish men anyway. Finally, the fort in Dromana. It was created during the Iron Age, and does contain Roman artefacts, but that doesn't necessarily prove the Romans stayed there. The fort could have been built by Irish Celts who obtained the artefacts by trading with the Romans for them. Now this doesn't mean the Romans didn't intend on invading. The opposite is actually true. Tacitus wrote, Agricola posted troops in that part of Britain which faces Ireland, in hope of an assault rather than fear of attack. In 1977, more evidence to support this claim was found when archaeologists discovered a Roman camp big enough to accommodate 5,000 men at Girvan Mains, a coastal area in Britain near the closest crossing point to Ireland, and directly in line with the coastal marker used by people at the time to cross. So what happened? Well, during the winter of the planned invasion, the tribes of North Caledonia decided to stage an uprising, which meant Agricola had to abandon his plans in order to deal with the threat. So, to answer this video's question, some Scottish pagan is the reason there aren't Roman aqueducts in Dublin. Although the Romans could have tried to conquer Ireland again at any time, two things happened which prevented that from happening. There were more pressing issues to deal with on the mainland in, well, you can probably guess where. And two, they're making a lot of money on taxes on goods coming from Ireland anyway. So why bother spending huge amounts of resources to conduct a campaign and control the island when they were essentially making passive income? Thank you for watching.